Hey, everybody, welcome back. Bo Prosser here with my friend Ruben Swint, the generosity guy. Welcome, Ruben. Glad to see you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining me again this week. Last week, we began a fascinating discussion unpacking 7 guiding principles for building generosity in our churches. Uh, Ruben calls them the 7 generosity principles. I've nicknamed them the Magnificent Seven. That goes back to my childhood and that great Western movie, or maybe Jim Cramer's Magnificent Seven stocks. I don't know, but Ruben, today we're looking at Ruben Swint's Magnificent Seven, and we'll keep building on that. Now, last week we talked about 2 of the 7. The first one, churches have no needs, unpacking the myth that of course churches have needs, but we always talk as if we don't have any needs. And we're not doing a good job communicating specifically what we need from the people around us. And then the second principle, there is more than enough. Absolutely, we have more than enough. We just would rather live with gloom and doom. As Tony Campolo used to say, I have good news. All the money we need is in this room. Bad news, it's in your wallet. So we are continuing to build generous givers as a part of our churches and the work that we're doing. And today we're looking at 3 more of these 7 principles to help you grow the generosity in your church. So Ruben, thanks again for jumping in. Basic number 3, words are worlds. What does that mean?
Well, if you are, as a church leader, clergy, lay leader, are attempting to create a new reality around giving in your congregation, then I think that requires new language. So I've been thinking about how do we move beyond budget, stewardship, not leaving stewardship necessarily behind, but that's not as engaging a word nowadays in our churches because churches have corrupted that word. They've turned stewardship into fundraising for the budget. And nowadays, what people are really hearing when they hear the word stewardship is they're hearing some kind of variation of a hunt for green October, so that in the fall of the year, we catch up on our behind the budget giving, we promote stewardship, and we hope by the end of the year, all of our income has covered and completely paid for our expenses. Now, that's what people expect. So I say, why don't we just shift the conversation and interject some newer words and see if that doesn't pique interest, and seeing if that doesn't today communicate more precisely. Here's my glossary. Rather than talk about pledging a budget, talk about supporting our annual plan of ministry, our annual ministry plan, or just our ministry plan for the next year. Rather than talk about a pledge card or even a commitment card, why don't we talk about filling out your personal giving plan? You get to choose, and it's your plan for participating in our shared ministry. In terms of reports to congregations, we've adopted some business language like income and expenses. I would rather use contributions, because that's what we receive, are contributions in our churches. We're not selling a product. We're not selling a service. We're not on eBay. We are receiving the contributions of Christians. And I also believe that we can talk about the cost of ministry. That's a good biblical word. Pay the cost.
Absolutely.
It's the cost of discipleship. Well, we have cost in delivering ministry as well. Stewardship. I'm reluctant to give up stewardship because there's a segment in all of our congregations who respond to stewardship because they've been faithful stewards for decades. But I would add to that a companion term, generosity. So when we talk about our stewardship program or campaign, why not talk about our generosity celebration, if we will? Some churches get behind, they get anxious, they get nervous, they look at their past history in giving. They know by the end of the year they will catch up in terms of their annual contributions, but they still feel the need to encourage the folk. So they talk about a catch-up offering. I talk about a go-forward offering. I want to talk about achieving positive results. So let's go forward. Let's continue. Let's be the church we've always been in terms of securing funds for our ministries. We want you to support the church. I'd rather say we want to expand the kingdom in our community. And then again, there's that old tired language of we need to pay our bills and to meet the church's needs. And I'm saying, what we need to do is support the church's solutions to the needs of others. So one question to ask as you're beginning, or several questions, to shift language, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to maintain the institution? Are you trying to take care of the congregation like you would country club members? Or are you trying to expand the kingdom of God? How much of each of these three goals is part of your appeal every fall?
I think it goes back to what we talked about last week. The foundational moment is setting the vision of what
Yes.
we want out of generosity. And so many churches that I know don't take time to delve into their mission and vision. And so they have trouble inviting people into stewardship in any way, much less generosity. This all seems so simple, though. Why aren't church leaders moving with the language to reflect the culture that we're a part of?
That's the question. Why not make the shift in language? I think there's several reasons. One is inertia. We kind of know what we've talked about, the way we've talked about it in the past, and change agents aren't necessarily always successful in their congregations. There's a little bit of risk to do that. You have an entrenched leadership core that we ask to bring their skills from the occupations that they're engaged in. And this is their language as accountants and financiers and bankers, and they like income and they like expenses and they like stewardship, and they are people who look at the expense column. And so, and we need them. They need to do that. But what I want to do is introduce language that looks at the income column, that fills up that column. So I think that's some of the principal reasons. And what I've always found is when I introduce this, someone will ask me, well, who's doing this and how has it worked for them?
And you have some folks that you can refer to if people call up, respond to me or respond to you and want
Yes.
more, we can certainly direct them in ways they need to go. I think also there's perhaps a conversation and language that the finance committee might use inside the committee room, if you will, but
Yes.
those words need to be translated out in a different way, in a different word, to the congregation. And oftentimes we're too busy, or maybe we just don't understand what the new words are, so we don't take the time to do that.
You're speaking about internal language versus external language.
Right.
And I had a 3-week engagement with a congregation one time introducing new language, and everybody was on board. We're ready to go. And the senior minister comes in for the last meeting and blesses the committee, thanks him for the work. And as he is exiting, he uses all of the old language and said, that's what we're going to do. And he leaves, and then everybody left, including me, looks at me and they says, did he just say the opposite of what we agreed to do? I said, yes. And that tells me you're going to have to be bilingual for a while.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And for the first time in history, we're dealing with 5, some even identify 6 different generations
Oh,
at
yeah.
work in the church. Which brings me to basic number 4. Churches have multiple identities. What can you tell us about that?
Well, one of the fallacies I think that we can be trapped in is to think that everybody in our congregation is identical. They're exactly alike. They're all the same, but they're not. And generational difference is one way in which we're different. But whether you're on the inside core group is another way we're different, because that's generally 15 to 20% of the congregation who are making the thing work, if you will. And
Right.
everyone else is related in some way, but not as intensely so. So I talk about there are different identities that are existing within your congregation, and it may not be age related. It may be where they are in the concentric levels of involvement in your congregation. There is definitely an institutional identity, because we have people who work on things in our churches like our purpose, organization, staff, space, policies and procedures, marketing, both internally and externally, and also on volunteer time. Institutional requirements take up a lot of time, energy, and money. It is not unusual for congregations to approach 70% of their ministry plan cost go to 2 areas: personnel and space, or facilities, if you will. And once a congregation moves beyond 70%, delegating or directing its resources, then it becomes much more difficult. Communities are held together by shared purpose, shared values, shared memories, shared experiences. Communities are voluntary associations of people who invest their time and energy for things they understand and know and participate in with other people. And the main thing they're trying to invest in, whether they realize it or not, are in relationships. Relationships are the key lubricant, if you will, of community health and community life. So another identity that churches have is as a movement. In fact, I believe the church began as a movement, and there's no way to underestimate the power of a movement whose time has come and whose leader has arrived. And these movements are built upon a cause that is hopeful. So our challenge is to understand which identity from which we should be speaking, because these 3 identities are there in the congregation at all times, and they need to hear different messages at different times. If you want to grow generosity in your congregation, you are rarely going to use the institutional voice. You're going to use the community voice. And if you really want to connect people with excitement to investing their time, energy, and money, you'll speak as a movement, a cause. There's nothing more powerful than a cause whose time has come, especially if it's a hopeful cause.
I think there may be one other identity, especially for smaller churches and churches in a rural setting. That's the word family.
Yes.
While you are speaking to community being the larger congregation and the context in which that congregation sits, I find a lot of the churches I work with talk about their church as a family. How would you respond to that word?
Well, there are churches, because of their location and their size, who are what we would call family-run churches, because there is a large blood relationship family within that church. But most churches that are small tend to be intimate. One reason for that is it's difficult to, quote, hide in a small church. Everybody is visible by their presence, and they're recognizable by their absence. And so there is that intimacy factor. And I appreciate you adding family as one of those identities. And it does tend to run in the smaller churches. You can see it replicated in larger churches, but not church-wide, typically within a Bible study class that is highly connected and very
Right.
social.
Right. Yeah. So let's shift to number 5. This is my favorite personally, because it gets at the spiritual formation of each of us as we are growing in our generosity. Basic number 5, giving is a spiritual discipline. What does that mean to you, Ruben?
Well, to me, it's a reminder that giving is more than the way we pay the cost of ministry. Giving is more than a hunt for Green October. Giving is an exercise that ultimately helps, heals, and saves people that we are engaging with our ministry solution. But the act of giving itself benefits us, and it connects us to God's greater purpose. I talk a lot about the giving path as an alternative to talking only about tithing. And I say, get on the path somewhere. Find your passion and give towards that with your time, your energy, and whatever. I also think that progress on our giving path should help us move farther along in our spiritual journey. I think there are parallel tracks that have a symbiotic relationship with one another. One of the things we do when we give is we reflect Christ-likeness. We are becoming more like Christ, who said that it is more blessed to give than to receive. And we're living more fully into our created nature as being in the image of God. God was the first generous force in the universe. God was first mover. And it is from God's generosity that God created. And we have our universe, we have our worlds, we have our planet, we have our communities. And we're kind of co-partners, if you will, with God, because we continue that creative act ourselves in how we live our lives. It's more than just birthing more children. It's birthing new ideas that bless people. And so I'm thinking spirituality can easily be formed out of a giving habit and a giving behavior, just as it can be formed out of regular worship, Bible study, and prayer time.
I often pray the prayer, Lord, what would you have me to do? And especially when it comes to opportunities for generosity. There are always people who are going to come at me asking me to give, asking me to support, asking me to do this and such. And several of those opportunities are transactional. So if you give me this gift, I'll give you this t-shirt. Or if you give me this gift, I'll give you a picture of this dog you just adopted. Or if you give me this, I'll give you that. What's the difference between a spiritual discipline and a transactional gift in your mind?
Well, I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. You know, generosity that is compelled or that is, quote, purchased is not generosity. The very nature of generosity is that there is no exchange of value. It's the giving of one set of values, whether it's money or time or energy or influence, to another person or to an enterprise organized to help people, expecting absolutely nothing in return. And if you're not giving in that way, you're not necessarily practicing generosity. You can give and not really be a generous person because you're expecting your name on a building or your name on a list at a certain level, or you're expecting some kind of return. That's not how generosity works. So that would be my answer to that. It's not transactional, it's relational. And you have to trust that that relationship will be there, whether it's ever communicated to you or not. The fact that you touched another person. Now, let me say this too. I think the most generous acts are ones that are spontaneous. In other words, all of a sudden in front of us, there's a need and we act and then we move on. And we're not even expecting thanks, because that in some ways is a return of value, if you will. But I have a good friend who, often when he eats in a restaurant, he looks for somebody in that restaurant whose meal he would like to purchase. And he does it through the wait staff and commits them to silence and anonymity and whatever. And when the bill comes, they tell them someone has purchased your meal. You don't owe anything.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah.
And that's his lifestyle, you know,
Ah.
and I try to emulate that when I can. And it's a fantastic feeling for me. And I don't have to receive a thing from anybody else.
Well, what restaurant are you going to be at this week? I'll try to show up and sit over in the corner.
I love Cracker Barrel.
Man, thanks so much for this. The relational aspect, we talk a lot about the vertical relationship between us and our loving and eternal God. We talk about the horizontal relationship between us and those that are around us. And certainly as a spiritual discipline, we are giving our ability to be generous to God, and then we are sharing beyond that. Folks, we are not preaching a gospel here that is giving to get. I think you already understand that.
Right.
This is not the prosperity gospel. This is the generosity gospel.
That's
and
right.
I am so grateful to share time with my friend, Ruben Swint, the generosity guy. So Ruben, thanks again for being with me. And I look forward to seeing what happens next week as we bring this series to a close. Folks, you can find us on the Facebook page, obviously. You can find us on the YouTube channel, Center for Christian Education. And you can also find us at boprosser.com/devotionals. If you would, please give me some emojis that tell me you're out there. Send me some comments. That would be helpful from the Facebook side. Also, subscribe to our channel so that we can keep you up to date when new videos are dropping and other opportunities are before you. Thanks so much, Ruben, the generosity guy.
My pleasure.
With your time today. Folks, Bo Prosser and the Beard, I'll see you next time.